The iron gates of the Vance estate did not welcome guests. They warned them. Rain lashed against Sienna Miller's cracked windshield, the wipers squeaking a rhythmic, desperate protest. Inside her battered sedan, the air smelled of stale coffee and the faint, medicinal tang of her mother's dialysis wraps. A sudden thunk echoed through the cabin. The front passenger will hit a pothole, sending her last remaining plastic hubcap spinning into the dark Pacific Heights gutter. She did not cry. She had no time for tears. Her mother's medical bills sat on the passenger seat, a stack of white paper stamped with red urgent notices. $50,000. That was the price of a second chance at life. Sienna gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She adjusted her second-hand blazer, smoothed down her cheap cotton skirt, and stepped into the storm. To understand how Sienna found herself standing at the edge of this gilded abyss, we must turn back the clock to where the storm first began. 10 minutes earlier, Sienna stood in the grand foyer of the Vance mansion. The air smelled of polished mahogany, expensive beeswax, and cold marble. High above, a crystal chandelier cast sharp, icy light onto the checkered floor. It was a house built for display, not for living. Chloe, the head housekeeper, stood near the sweeping staircase. She was young, impeccably groomed in a tailored black uniform, and carried an aura of absolute superiority. Her eyes traveled down Sienna's outfit, lingering on the faded hem of her skirt and the scuffed toes of her shoes. Mr. Vance values discretion and immaculate standards, Chloe said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She tapped a silver pen against her leather clipboard. I see you drove up in that artifact. I trust you parked it out of sight from the main driveway. We have neighbors who care about the neighborhood's aesthetic. Sienna felt a familiar coldness bloom in her chest. It was the same tone her ex-husband used during their 5 years of marriage, the quiet, dismissive cruelty that made a person feel invisible. For years, she had shrunk under that tone. She had apologized for existing. She had swallowed her pride until she nearly choked on it. Not today. The car runs, Chloe, Sienna said, her voice steady and low. And its engine doesn't affect my ability to care for a child. Chloe's smile tightened, her eyes narrowing slightly, but before she could reply, heavy footsteps echoed down the marble hallway. Julian Vance entered the foyer. He was a tall man in his mid-30s, broad-shouldered, wearing a tailored charcoal suit without a tie. His dark hair was brushed back, revealing sharp jawlines and eyes as gray as a winter sky. He carried the cold authority of a man who commanded boardrooms and dissected financial ledgers for fun. But beneath the polished exterior lay a deep, rigid tension, the posture of a man constantly waiting for an attack. He did not offer a handshake. He did not ask her to sit. He stood 3 feet away, inspecting her like a line item on an audit sheet. Sienna Miller, Julian began. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth yet hard as granite. 5 years as a teaching assistant. CPR certified. Clean record. You live in the Mission District. Your commute is 35 minutes without traffic. 32, Sienna corrected quietly. Julian raised an eyebrow. I do not tolerate tardiness. In this house, 3 o'clock means 2:45. If my daughter has an appointment at 4, you are backing out of the driveway at 3:40. My schedule is not a suggestion. It is a commandment. Sienna met his gaze without flinching. She smelled the faint scent of cedarwood and black coffee on him. I understand punctuality, Mr. Vance. Good, Julian said, stepping closer. The air between them grew tight, because the last 3 nannies lasted less than a month. My daughter, Mia, is 6. She is sharp, she is distant, and she tests people. Her mother passed away 3 years ago. Mia does not trust easily, and I do not have time for tears or emotional breakdowns in the pantry. He pulled a thick document from his jacket and held it out. Rule number 1. Mia is never left unattended. Not for 30 seconds. Rule number 2. This house remains spotless. Rule number 3. Julian leaned in slightly, his gray eyes locking onto hers with ruthless clarity. Is the most important. You are an employee, a service provider. Do not get attached to my daughter. Do not fall in love with this house. And above all, do not fall in love with me. Silence settled over the foyer. Chloe smirked from the shadow of the staircase, waiting for Sienna to stumble, to blush, or to break. Sienna looked at the non-disclosure agreement in Julian's hand. Then she looked up into the cold, handsome face of the billionaire standing before her. A quiet, fierce spark ignited inside her chest. The days of Sienna, the victim, were dead. She reached out, took the pen from Chloe's clipboard, and signed her name on the bottom line with a firm, unbroken stroke. She handed the paper back to Julian. Then she adjusted her collar, met his icy gaze, and allowed a faint, razor-sharp smile to touch her lips. "Mr. Vance," Sienna said, her voice calm, clear, and dripping with absolute self-possession. "You pay me to protect and educate your daughter, not to write love poetry. Rest assured, you are completely out of my budget and entirely out of my type." Chloe's jaw dropped slightly. Julian froze, his gray eyes darkening as he searched her face for a trace of hesitation. He found none. Sienna turned her back on the master of the house and walked toward the grand staircase. "Now," Sienna said, her heels clicking crisply against the marble, "where is Mia? I have a job to do." Later that night, in the quiet solitude of the nanny quarters, the storm raged outside her window. Sienna sat at a small wooden desk. The faint glow of her laptop screen illuminated her face. She pulled up an online portal for child psychology certification, opened a blank notebook, and began to write. The morning sun cut through the heavy fog over Pacific Heights, casting cold shadows across the mahogany floor of the playroom. Sienna stood at the threshold, holding a tray of blueberry pancakes. The sweet scent of vanilla and melted butter filled the air, fighting the harsh smell of bleach. In the center of the room sat Mia. The 6-year-old wore a crisp school uniform, her hair tied in a tight ponytail. She did not look up. She aggressively stacked wooden blocks, building a tower only to knock it down with a sharp crash. "I don't eat blueberries," Mia said, her voice small and flat. "Nanny Jessica gave me chocolate chips." Then she cried and left. Everyone leaves. Sienna set the tray on a low table. She did not offer a pitying smile. She did not rush to hug the child. Instead, she sat on the rug, crossing her legs, and picked up a wooden block. "I'm not Jessica," Sienna said, her voice calm and steady. "And I don't leave because of dropped blocks. In my house, we build dragons." Sienna placed 3 blocks together. Mia stopped her hand mid-air. Her dark eyes, so like Julian's, narrowed in suspicion. For 15 minutes, no one spoke. Only the ticking of the grandfather clock filled the room. Slowly, Mia reached out. Her small fingers placed a red block on top of Sienna's green one. A silent pact was formed. By noon, the house returned to its rigid quiet. Julian insisted on separate meals, silent hallways, and absolute order. He ran his home like a hedge fund, treating emotional outbursts like bad investments. But Sienna refused to let Mia wither in that sterile vacuum. She knew childhood trauma. Her early education degree taught her the science, but her own broken past taught her the reality. Then came Chloe. The housekeeper glided into the kitchen at 2 o'clock, her heels clicking like marble chips on the hardwood floor. She carried a silver bowl of wax apples and a smirk that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Vance expects the silver to be polished by 4, Chloe said, tossing a rag onto the granite counter next to Sienna's laptop. And clean up those blocks. This is a residence, not a daycare. Though I suppose you can't tell the difference, coming from a public school budget. Chloe leaned closer, the sharp scent of her floral perfume overwhelming the air. She pointed out the window towards Sienna's battered sedan. That eyesore out back is embarrassing. A woman who can't afford a missing hubcap shouldn't give advice on how to raise a Vance. Sienna stopped typing. She stood up slowly. She did not raise her voice. She stepped into Chloe's personal space until the housekeeper took an involuntary step back. "I suggest you check the pantry, Chloe," Sienna said, her eyes cold and sharp. "The inventory ledger shows 3 cases of imported truffles missing this month. And last night, I saw you taking photos of Mr. Vance's tax documents on the study desk with your phone." Chloe's face drained of color. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "I suggest you focus on your own job," Sienna added softly, "before I decide to focus on yours." Chloe spun on her heel and hurried out, her arrogant posture crumbling. In his second-floor study, Julian watched the interaction through the security monitor on his wall. He sat motionless in his leather chair, the cold rim of his glass resting against his lip. He had hired Sienna, expecting a meek, desperate girl who needed a paycheck. Instead, he watched a woman who commanded respect without uttering a single yell. He watched her return to the kitchen, gently slice an apple into thin ribbons, and carry them up to Mia's room. On the screen, he saw his daughter, the girl who hadn't smiled since her mother's death, reach out and hand Sienna a crayon drawing of a dragon. A strange warmth tugged at Julian's chest, followed immediately by a wave of guilt. An hour later, Julian walked into the foyer. His face was a mask of stone. He signaled to 2 private security guards waiting at the front doors. "Chloe," Julian called out, his baritone voice slicing through the hall. The housekeeper hurried down the stairs, trying to smile. "Yes, Mr. Vance." "Your employment is terminated," Julian said flatly. "Pack your items. Security will escort you off the property in 5 minutes. If you set foot on Pacific Heights again, my legal team will file criminal charges for corporate espionage." Chloe gasped, turning desperate eyes toward Sienna, who stood near the playroom door. Sienna met her gaze with utter indifference. As the guards escorted the weeping housekeeper out into the rain, Julian turned toward Sienna. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a crisp, white envelope. He held it out. "A bonus," Julian said, his gray eyes searching her face. "For handling a security threat with composure." Sienna did not reach for the envelope. "I don't need a bonus for doing what's right for Mia, Mr. Vance." "Take it," Julian insisted, his voice softening by a fraction. "It's not charity. It's recognition." Sienna looked at the envelope, then at the man standing before her. For the first time, she saw a crack in his armor, a father desperately trying to protect his broken world. She took the envelope. "Thank you, Julian." She used his first name. He didn't correct her. That evening, after Mia fell asleep holding her new drawing, Sienna sat at her small desk. She opened her laptop, pulled up her financial spreadsheet, and logged into her evening study portal. She added the bonus directly to her mother's medical fund, then opened her textbook on child trauma recovery. She was no longer just surviving in this house. She was building her fortress. A harsh red stamp glared from the top of the hospital invoice. Denied. Sienna sat in the hospital waiting room at 6 in the morning. The air smelled of sharp antiseptic, stale floor wax, and lukewarm drip coffee. Her mother lay in the adjacent room, hooked to a humming dialysis machine that pulsed with rhythmic mechanical wheezes. The doctor had been clear. Her mother's kidney function was dropping fast. A transplant was urgent. Her brother Sawyer was a matching living donor, but without the $50,000 emergency surgical deposit, the hospital would not schedule the operating room. Sienna did not cry. She folded the paper neatly, placed it inside her leather tote, and pulled out her notebook. She calculated her savings, mapped out extra night shifts, and listed potential loan applications. She refused to play the helpless victim. She took total responsibility for her family's survival. By 7:30, Sienna was back at the Vance estate. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer over a crisp white shirt, a clean, professional upgrade from her old thrift store knits. She stood taller, her posture poised, and her movements precise. At 9 o'clock, the heavy oak front door swung open without a knock. Vivian Sterling walked into the foyer. She wore a sharp cream-colored silk suit, dripping in gold jewelry, carrying a leather handbag that cost more than Sienna's annual salary. She smelled overpoweringly of costly tuberose perfume. Behind her stood two drivers carrying designer shopping bags. Vivian stopped, her sharp heels clicking loudly against the marble. She looked Sienna up and down, her eyes filled with cold condescension. "Where is Julian?" Vivian demanded, tossing her silk scarf onto the foyer table. "And who are you? The new maid? Take these bags upstairs to the guest suite, immediately. And bring me an iced matcha latte. No oat milk." Sienna did not move. She kept her hands folded in front of her, her gaze steady and unbothered. "I am Sienna Miller, Mia's private nanny and developmental specialist," Sienna said, her voice smooth and completely unshakable. "Mr. Vance is in a private conference call in his study. He does not permit unscheduled visitors." Vivian's cheeks flushed pink. "Unscheduled? I am the daughter of his primary business partner. My father controls half his commercial leases. You just hired help." Before Vivian could take another step toward the grand staircase, a door snapped shut down the hall. Julian stepped into the foyer. His face was set in granite, his gray eyes cold and razor-sharp. Vivian immediately changed her expression, putting on a bright, practiced smile. "Julian, darling, I dropped by so we could take Mia out to lunch. I thought we could discuss the Paris trip." "Vivian," Julian cut her off, his deep baritone cutting through the room like a blade. "I did not invite you here." "Well, your old housekeeper let me in last time." "My old housekeeper no longer works here," Julian said flatly. He stepped between Vivian and Sienna, his broad shoulders blocking Vivian's view. "And you do not dictate the schedule or staff in my home. Sienna is Mia's guardian, not your servant." Vivian gasped, her eyes flashing with anger. "Are you taking the side of a nanny over me? My father." "Your father and I conduct business at my office," Julian replied, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Use your connections to find the front door. Now." Vivian stared at him in disbelief, spun on her high heels, and marched out into the rain, slamming the heavy iron doors behind her. The foyer fell silent, save for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock. Julian turned to Sienna. His eyes softened as he looked at her composed face. "Are you all right?" Julian asked. "I am perfectly fine, Mr. Vance," Sienna replied calmly. "I have dealt with arrogant people before." Julian reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out an official document bearing the seal of the Vance Private Medical Foundation. He handed it to her. Sienna opened it. It was an approved wire transfer receipt for $50,000 paid directly to San Francisco General Hospital for her mother's transplant surgery. Sienna's breath caught in her throat. She looked up at Julian, her brown eyes wide with shock. "Julian, what is this?" "An investment," Julian said quietly, his gaze steady on hers. "My foundation funds emergency organ transplant grants. Your mother's surgeon submitted the application this morning. It was approved." "I cannot accept this as a handout," Sienna said immediately, her pride flaring up. "It is not a handout," Julian insisted, stepping closer. The faint scent of black coffee and cedarwood drifted between them. "It is a grant, but if your pride demands it, we can write an amendment to your employment agreement." We will deduct a small percentage from your bonus structure over the next 3 years. Sienna looked down at the paper, feeling a massive weight lift from her chest. Her mother would live. She looked back up at Julian, seeing the man behind the ruthless reputation, a man capable of quiet, profound kindness. "Thank you, Julian," Sienna said, her voice filled with deep, quiet dignity. "I will repay every cent, through my work and my dedication to Mia." "I know you will, Sienna," Julian said softly. That evening, Sienna sat in her room. She opened her financial ledger and recorded the grant agreement, setting up a structured repayment plan. Then, she pulled out a mat and spent 30 minutes completing her daily functional strength and martial arts self-defense training. She was no longer just preparing for her career. She was building physical and financial resilience for whatever lay ahead. The dark mahogany study smelled of rain, old paper, and unlit cigars. Julian stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the fog roll off the San Francisco Bay. The room was deathly quiet except for the hum of a secure satellite phone resting on his desk. Sienna stood near the bookshelf, her posture straight, her dark eyes calm. She held Mia's school folder in her hands. She wore her sharp charcoal blazer, standing with the quiet authority of a woman who no longer feared wealthy men or intimidating rooms. "Victor Sterling isn't just a business rival, Sienna," Julian said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. He turned around, his face pale in the dim, yellow lamplight. "He is a cartel-linked financial criminal. 6 years ago, I was a federal financial investigator. I built the wire fraud case against him. My wife, Eva, her car didn't just slide off the Pacific Coast Highway. Victor's men tampered with her brakes." Sienna felt a cold spike of shock run down her spine, but her expression did not crumble. She listened, absorbing every word with deep, grounded composure. Her mind processed the danger not with panic, but with sharp tactical focus. "The federal trial begins in 2 weeks," Julian continued, stepping toward her. The faint scent of cedarwood drifted between them. "I am the lead witness under the Federal Witness Protection Program. Victor knows his empire is collapsing. He is desperate. He knows about you now. He knows you care for Mia. That makes both of you prime targets." "We aren't targets, Julian," Sienna replied, her voice firm and unshakable. "We are a family worth fighting for. What is the plan?" Julian nodded, a flicker of profound respect flashing in his gray eyes. "My private cabin in Lake Tahoe. It is off-grid, heavily fortified, and monitored by my elite security team. We leave tonight before the storm hits the mountain pass." By midnight, the black SUV rolled out of the underground garage. Rain slashed against the windshield as Julian drove through the winding mountain roads heading north toward Sierra Nevada. Mia slept soundly in the back seat, clutching her favorite stuffed dragon. Sienna sat in the passenger seat, her eyes scanning the dark rear-view mirrors, checking every pair of headlights behind them with razor-sharp awareness. 2 hours past Sacramento. The rain turned into thick, heavy snow. White flakes slammed into the glass like swarms of moths. The pine trees on the roadside bent under the howling alpine wind. The roads grew slick with black ice. "Behind us," Sienna said sharply, her sense of danger instantly spiking. A heavy, dark pickup truck with tinted windows dropped its high beams, blinding Julian's rearview mirror. The engine roared, a deep, metallic growl that vibrated through the floorboards. "Hold on," Julian yelled, gripping the wheel tightly. The truck accelerated, smashing violently into their rear bumper. The harsh screech of tearing metal echoed through the cabin. The SUV skidded uncontrollably on the ice. Julian fought the steering wheel, but the heavy vehicle slammed sideways into a steep snowbank, rolling once before coming to a violent, crunching halt against a stand of pine trees. Glass shattered, Smoke smelled of hot oil, scorched rubber, and crushed pine needles. Silence fell over the wreckage, broken only by the whistling wind outside. Sienna's head throbbed. Blood dripped warm and slow down her temple, staining her collar. But she did not scream. She did not freeze. The victim mindset she had shed months ago was completely dead. She did not waste a single second weeping over bad luck or blaming fate. She took full control of her reality. "Julian," she called out softly. Julian slumped over the steering wheel, unconscious, blood pouring from a deep gash on his forehead. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. In the back, Mia let out a tiny, frightened whimper. "Mommy, Sienna?" "I am right here, baby," Sienna whispered instantly, her voice cold steel. "We are okay. Stay completely still." Sienna unbuckled her seatbelt. She reached for the dashboard emergency console, smashing her thumb against the hidden red SOS button. The satellite beacon flared to life, sending an encrypted distress signal directly to the FBI Federal Protection Unit and Julian's private security team. Outside, heavy boots crunched into the fresh snow. Harsh flashlight beams cut through the blizzard toward the overturned SUV. Men's voices barked orders over the roar of the wind. "Check the cabin. Grab the kid," a rough voice shouted. Sienna did not hesitate. She unlatched Mia's car seat, pulling the terrified girl into her arms. She kicked open the dented rear door, slipping out into the freezing alpine night. The biting wind stung her bleeding face, but she felt no pain. Only absolute clarity and physical readiness built over months of dedicated training. She wrapped her heavy coat around Mia, whispering softly into her ear. "Keep your eyes closed, sweetie. We are playing a game of hide and seek." Sienna carried Mia into the thick cover of the pine forest, vanishing into the blinding white storm just as the armed men reached the burning vehicle. She crouched low behind a snow-covered boulder, her heart beating in calm, controlled rhythm. She was no longer a helpless nanny running from her past. She was a guardian standing her ground in the dark. The wind howled through the granite crags of Lake Tahoe, driving needle-sharp snow into Sienna's face. The air smelled of freezing pine resin, ozone, and burning rubber from the overturned SUV down the slope. High above, dark clouds choked out the moonlight, leaving the forest drowned in icy blue shadows. Sienna crouched behind a frost-covered boulder, holding Mia tight against her chest. She felt the girl's heart hammering like a trapped bird. "Listen to me, Mia," Sienna whispered into her ear, her voice barely a breath. "We are playing a secret game. It is called the deep sea diver. Divers never make a sound underwater. Not a cough, not a gasp. Can you do that for me?" Mia nodded against Sienna's neck, her small fingers clutching Sienna's wool lapels with absolute trust. 50 yards away, flashlight beams sliced through the swirling blizzard. Heavy winter boots crunched loudly into the snow. 2 men in tactical gear moved up the ridge, their automatic rifles raised. She went up the slope. A man barked, his breath rising in white plumes. "Victor wants the kid alive. Kill the nanny." Sienna's mind was ice cold. There was no fear, no panic, no lingering shadow of the helpless woman she used to be. She did not curse her luck or wait for a savior. She took total ownership of her survival. She scanned her surroundings. A fallen pine branch lay buried in the snowdrift next to her boot, heavy, seasonwood wrapped in jagged ice. Slowly, Sienna wrapped her gloved hand around the branch. She scooped up a chunk of hard, packed snow with her other hand. One of the gunmen crested the ridge, stepping within 10 feet of her boulder. The beam of his flashlight swept across the snow, inching closer to Mia's pink boots. Sienna did not wait to be found. She hurled the frozen snowpack high into the dark branches of a pine tree 15 feet to the gunman's left. The sharp crack of breaking ice echoed through the woods. The gunman spun around, raising his rifle toward the noise. "Over there," he yelled. In that split second, Sienna launched herself from behind the boulder. She moved with explosive speed, driven by months of physical training and fierce protective instinct. She swung the heavy branch with all her strength, smashing it directly into the gunman's knee. The bone snapped with a harsh crunch. The man screamed, buckling into the snow. Before he could raise his weapon, Sienna stepped in, driving the blunt end of the branch into his chest, slamming him flat on his back. She stomped her boot onto his wrist, forcing him to drop the rifle, and kicked the weapon deep into the ravine below. "Run!" The second gunman shouted from the trees behind, raising his rifle toward her. Before he could pull the trigger, a blinding white spotlight burst through the storm from above. The deafening roar of twin helicopter blades tore the night apart, sending a gale of snow swirling into the air. Red and blue strobe lights flashed through the trees. Sirens wailed down the mountain highway. "FBI, drop your weapons." "Hands above your head," an amplified voice boomed from the chopper. Armed federal agents, in black snow gear, dropped from armored trucks, flooding the forest. Within seconds, the second gunman was tackled into the snow and cuffed. Down near the main road, another team surrounded a sleek sedan. Victor Sterling was dragged out from the back seat, his hands cuffed behind his back, his expensive coat covered in mud. Footsteps sprinted frantically up the ridge. "Sienna! Mia!" Julian burst through the tree line. His face was covered in dried blood, his coat torn, his gray eyes wild with terror. He stopped when he saw them. Sienna stood tall in the snow, holding Mia safely in her arms. Her face was bruised, her hair wild, her clothes soaked, but her eyes burned with quiet, invincible strength. Julian dropped to his knees in the deep snow before them. The ruthless billionaire, the unshakable investigator, wept openly. He wrapped his long arms around both of them, burying his face into Sienna's shoulder, shaking with relief. "You are safe," Julian choked out, his voice raw. "Thank God. You saved her. You saved us both." Sienna placed a warm hand on the back of his neck, feeling his rapid heartbeat slow down. "We saved ourselves, Julian. We are unbroken." The storm began to clear, revealing a blanket of stars above the pines. Federal agents processed the scene below, escorting Victor Sterling into a steel transport van. Julian pulled back slightly, looking up into Sienna's face. Slowly, he reached into his jacket, pulled out a small velvet box, and opened it in the snow. A brilliant diamond caught the flashing emergency lights. 3 months ago, I wrote a rule," Julian said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I told you not to fall in love with my house, my daughter, or me. I broke that rule the second you looked me in the eye and told me I was out of your budget." He looked at her with total vulnerability. "I don't offer you a contract, Sienna. I offer you my heart, my life, and my complete respect. Will you marry me? Not as my employee, but as my equal, my partner, and the love of my life." Sienna looked down at the man kneeling before her, then at Mia, who was smiling softly against her shoulder. She did not see a wealthy boss saving her from poverty. She saw a man who had earned her trust, standing beside a woman who had built her own strength. A clear, radiant smile broke across Sienna's face. "Yes, Julian," Sienna said softly. "I will." Julian slid the ring onto her finger, pulled her close, and kissed her under the winter sky, while Mia wrapped her arms around both of them. 1 year later, golden light poured across the cliffs of Carmel by the sea. The late afternoon Pacific breeze smelled of salt, warm sand, and blooming wild ice plants. Turquoise waves crashed against white granite rocks, creating a soft, rhythmic roar that filled the coastline. Sienna stood near the edge of the scenic lookout, her feet planted firmly on the wooden footpath. She wore a tailored linen coat over a simple silk dress. She looked radiant, poised, and completely self-possessed. Her life had transformed entirely, built on her own relentless effort and clear vision. She had earned her master's degree in child psychology. 6 months ago, she founded her own independent practice, the Anchor Center, offering specialized developmental therapy for children who survived family trauma. She was financially independent, owning her work, her time, and her future. Her mother sat nearby on a sunlit bench, healthy and vibrant, holding a cup of warm tea. Her brother Sawyer sat beside her, laughing as he showed her photos on his phone. The surgery had been a total success. Sienna stepped off the footpath, walking down toward a small cafe near the town plaza to pick up fresh pastries. As she crossed the terrace, a man stepped out from the doorway. He wore a rumpled suit, carrying a paper coffee cup. It was Mark, her ex-husband. Mark froze. His eyes widened as he looked at Sienna. He saw the sharp, elegant cut of her coat, her confident posture, and the calm, unbothered warmth in her eyes. There was no trace left of the anxious, quiet woman he had spent 5 years belittling in their cramped apartment. Sienna, Mark stammered, his voice thin and uncertain. He took a hesitant step forward. Is that really you? You look incredible." Sienna stopped. She looked at him, the man who had spent years making her feel invisible, using emotional coldness to shrink her self-worth. 4 months after their divorce, she had carried anger like a heavy stone in her chest. But now, looking at him, she felt nothing. No anger, no bitterness, no desire for revenge. She felt only complete, liberating indifference. She had taken 100% responsibility for her own happiness, shedding the victim mindset forever. "Hello, Mark," Sienna said. Her voice was smooth, pleasant, and entirely unattached. "I heard you open a clinic," Mark said, shifting uncomfortably on his feet, his eyes lingering on the diamond ring on her left hand. I always knew you were smart. Maybe we could get coffee sometime, catch up." Sienna offered a faint, polite smile, the smile of a stranger passing on a street. "I am living a wonderful life, Mark," Sienna replied softly, her words carrying absolute clarity. "I wish you well." Without waiting for his response, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking crisply against the stone path. She did not look back. She had freed herself from the past. Sienna returned to the beach cove as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of amber, violet, and gold. It was the golden hour. Mia ran across the sand below, her bright red boots splashing in the shallow foam. She laughed aloud, chasing a small golden retriever puppy that bounced through the dry kelp. Julian walked up behind Sienna. He wore a casual navy cashmere sweater, his dark hair ruffled by the sea wind. He wrapped his arms gently around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He smelled of sea salt, cedarwood, and warm wool. "How was the town?" Julian asked softly, resting his chin against her hair. "Peaceful," Sienna whispered, resting her hands over his. "Completely peaceful." They stood together in total harmony, two independent individuals who had chosen each other as equals, bound by trust, respect, and deep love. Mia came sprinting up the sand dune, her cheeks flushed pink, her dark eyes shining with joy. She threw her arms around Sienna's knees. "Mommy Sienna." Mia giggled, looking up with bright, hopeful eyes. "Daddy and I were talking. When are we going to get a baby brother? I want to teach him how to build paper dragons." Sienna laughed, a warm, rich sound that echoed across the quiet beach. She looked up at Julian, whose gray eyes burned with quiet warmth and profound devotion. "We will see very soon, sweetie," Sienna said, kissing Mia's forehead. Suddenly, a crisp, chiming sound broke the quiet atmosphere. Julian reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his secure satellite phone. A text notification flashed on the dark screen from an untraceable international number. Julian opened the message. It contained a high-resolution photograph taken 5 minutes ago from the cliffs above. A clear photo of Sienna, Julian, and Mia standing together on the beach. Beneath the photograph, a single line of text appeared. Victor Sterling lost his empire, Vance. But his partners never forget a debt. See you in New York. Julian's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second. He began to close the phone. Sienna reached out, her fingers gently covering his hand. She looked at the screen, then looked up into Julian's eyes. She did not flinch. She did not tremble. Her face showed no fear, only unshakable strength, sharp intelligence, and fierce resolve. "Let them try, Julian," Sienna said, her voice smooth as silk and cold as steel. "We are ready." Julian looked at his wife, a proud, fearless smile breaking across his face. He locked the phone and slid it back into his pocket. They stood side by side on the golden sand, holding hands as the last rays of sunlight warmed their faces, standing together as an unbroken fortress against whatever storm lay ahead. All shadows must fade before the truth, and every pain is simply the start of a beautiful rebirth. Always remember, the right to write a new chapter of your life is forever in your hands. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below so we know we're walking this journey together. Hope to see you on the next page.